What we'd like is for each of you to give us your perspective on this movie, this documentary, and what you do in Vermont and how it relates to immigration.
So I actually got to screen the movie last night, so I got a little time to think about it, and then obviously just saw it with you guys. And I've been pretty familiar with the SB 1070. When it came out, I paid a lot of attention to it as it affected our program. Oh, sorry. And, you know, I've seen a lot of documentaries done on the topics of immigration in the U.S., and I thought this one really did a good job of showing both sides. I mean, I think that it's a really complicated issue, and I think, you know, really what I can see is the only thing that everybody does agree on is that our immigration system is really broken. That seems to be the one thing that nobody debates. I thought that it was pretty accurate and well, and I think that they did a good job on it. That what I particularly liked about the film is showing their perspective from the ranchers, because I think that there's some interesting parallels to that with Vermont farmers and producers. I think that sometimes these folks get caught in the middle of the situation, and it's really hard to try to keep that in perspective. So I like that they showed that, and I like that they ended with that perspective of that particular farmer that looks like his and his family's farm for generations. So yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about the movie. Folks can ask me more specific questions if they have them. But what do I do in Vermont? So I work for the University of Vermont Extension, and I oversee the Migrant Education Program. I've been there almost a decade, and I also oversee a number of other projects that all have a farm worker focus. They range in increasing access to healthcare, helping children and young adults access education, be it getting their high school diploma or learning English or gaining life skills. I have other projects that focus on management of a Latino workforce on dairy farms, so sort of goes across the whole spectrum through the university. And in that position, I'm fortunate to see a lot of sort of the ins and outs on what happens in Vermont agriculture and with the folks that come here to work on our farms. So, you know, what is my work specifically? I believe the question was, in my relationship with immigration reform. You know, I'm not a policy advocate. I work as an outreach professional and an educator. Certainly, immigration reform, I by all means support, and I see a lot of negative repercussions to people that work really hard in the state as a result of a broken immigration system. So I guess I'll keep it at that. The one thing that I will say that I'm fortunate with the Migrant Education Program, it's a national program, and we're one of the only organizations, simply because it's an educational program, that documentation status is a non-issue for us, because in the United States of America, regardless of your documentation status, everybody here has a right to go to school and to graduate. So I'm fortunate in that I really don't have any limitations with the individuals that the program and clients and students we serve. So,
I'm Dan Barrett from the ACLU. I do the litigation at the ACLU, and what I liked about the film, and I had the joy of seeing it twice now, was that it showed the two problems that are inherent in trying to ask state officials to enforce immigration law. One is the problem that we've seen here in Vermont, which is racial profiling, not just of migrant workers, but of any non-white driver, right? And I thought the film did a very good job of showing the indignity of being pulled over and treated like a criminal when, you saw the driver who was from Guam, which is an American possession, and she's a U.S. citizen, and yet, she's pulled over and treated, as the bystander suggests, differently because she has darker skin. So there's that element of it that I thought was portrayed very well. And the second piece of it was portraying the sort of mindlessness of our immigration policy, and especially our enforcement policy, where people who are swept into the system are not necessarily provided with lawyers. They're often made to sign things that they don't understand. My colleagues and other affiliates have done hair-raising litigation trying to get lawyers for instance, severely mentally ill people who are placed into removal proceedings, who cannot even function to understand what's going on, let alone defend themselves against this proceeding. So the intersection of those two subjects, the sort of silliness of the federal system and the real lurking human temptation of profiling and racism in the state system, I thought was portrayed very well in the movie. Here in Vermont, what the ACLU has been most active with is trying to combat the DWB phenomenon, driving while black or brown, because the state is so overwhelmingly white that all of us, regardless of our intentions, tend to get desensitized to the very odd racial balance in Vermont. I mean, it's rare to see someone who's not white in Vermont, and so that can affect the way law enforcement interacts with people, and it concerns us very much, especially because in a rural state there is no way to get around without driving. And so when we start talking about prejudiced enforcement of the traffic law or a hyper-technical enforcement of the traffic law aimed at non-white people, that is a severe problem in Vermont, where you don't have any other option but driving. Here in Vermont, there isn't the same sort of action in terms of litigation around border issues, but we were very lucky to help Migrant Justice push for the changes in the driver's license requirements that were enacted by the legislature and signed by the governor last year. We were very, very happy to do that, because to us, the ability to move around a rural state is not about immigration, but it's about freedom of movement, the ability to go to church, the ability to visit friends, the ability to go to other farms, things like that. So we were very happy to be able to be part of that struggle.
Hola, mi nombre es Abel Garcia.
Hello, my name is Abel Garcia,
Yo soy parte de Justicia Migrante
and I'm a part of Migrant Justice.
y soy nuevo en esto, pero es interesante porque he aprendido mucho acerca de mis derechos
And I'm new in this, but it's interesting because I've learned a lot about my rights.
y hace como 2 años empezamos la campaña de licencias
And 2 years ago, we started the driver's license campaign,
y se aprobaron el 5 de junio.
and we won that the 5th of June
This
last
año.
year, this year.
Para este enero que viene quizá vamos a tener licencias, es probable que tenemos licencias, aunque son un poco diferentes, son diferentes a las de ustedes porque están marcadas, pero muchos de mis compañeros están felices porque al fin van a tener un poco de libertad.
And so this coming January, we're going to have licenses, and they'll be slightly different. We're still, many of my friends we're very excited to have these licenses.
Que es lo que nos hace falta a todos, porque todos trabajamos pero no tenemos los mismos derechos ni la libertad para movilizarnos.
And we all work, but we don't have the same rights or the same ability to move.
Entonces estamos muy felices y también son varios proyectos que se hacen también, como por ejemplo
And we're very happy, and there's also other projects we do, such as
también luchamos para que la policía estatal no nos pare por tener distintos colores de piel.
And we also worked on a bias-free policing policy that the state police
Entonces
now follow.
también eso se aprobó una ley que no nos pueden parar solo por nuestro color.
And now we can't be stopped solely for the color of our skin.
Sí, y bueno, como vieron en el video, mucha gente se está uniendo, hay muchas organizaciones que se están uniendo de varios estados para parar deportaciones, porque el presidente, bueno, yo entiendo que ha hecho promesas como todos y no todas las promesas las cumple, entonces...
And so as you saw in the movie, there's lots of organizations from many states working together because the president has made a lot of promises, but he's not fulfilling them.
Entonces, como el proceso de los documentos está un poco lento.
And so the process of documents is very slow.
Getting documents.
Getting documents.
La gente se está uniendo para parar las deportaciones porque están haciendo muchas deportaciones.
And so the people are uniting to stop deportations because there's lots of deportations happening.
Y bueno, yo tuve la oportunidad de ir a Phoenix, Arizona a una campaña que se hizo para cerrar ICE.
And I was lucky to have the opportunity to go to Arizona to be part of a campaign to shut down ICE in Phoenix.
Y allí fue interesante porque fueron muchas personas de varias organizaciones de varios estados y saber cómo están trabajando ellos es muy interesante. Nosotros estamos aprendiendo también.
And so there's organizations from all over the country there, and they're able to share their experiences, and we're learning about what other people are doing.
Y yo entiendo que este estado sí es un poco tranquilo, un poco tranquilo en el hecho de que no he visto muchas deportaciones, pero sí es no sé, desde el punto que yo veo que no tenemos los mismos derechos.
I understand that this state is not as intense as other places. There aren't as many deportations, pero también ¿qué dijiste, perdón?
Que no tenemos la misma libertad.
But the truth is we don't have the same liberty, the same rights.
Sí, es un poco difícil.
It's a little difficult.
Pero estamos luchando para mejorar eso.
And we're fighting to improve this.
Erin, can you talk about how many children that you know of that are in Vermont, migrant children?
So the Migrant Ed program serves what we call two classifications of students. So first, our age requirements limit us to not serving the entire state migrant farm worker population. So you've got to be under age 22 to be enrolled in our program. So of that, we serve approximately 500 students and throughout the state, and half of those students are what we call out-of-school youth. The other half of the students are the children of farm workers, and it's about a 50-50 split. So an out-of-school youth is somebody who has come to the United States, come to Vermont to work on their own in agriculture, that has not yet completed their high school diploma, and who is engaged in what we consider eligible migrant farm work, temporary or seasonal. They're here for a limited time. And that we're serving about 250 of those students. Almost all of these students are coming from Mexico. 90% are coming from Mexico, 10% from Guatemala. So 100% are like Latino farm workers here on their own to work. The other half, the children of the farm workers, only a very small percentage of those children are actually Latino Spanish-speaking kids. And the reason is because it's very difficult to get from Mexico to Vermont with your children. And for folks that are sort of involved in this climate, you'll see that there's very few families that are here. There's many young men here working independently on their own, men and women. So again, we're serving 250 children of farm workers, but I would say 5% off the top of my head are Spanish-speaking origin. So what that means is we have a lot of Anglo-American English-speaking migrant farm workers in our state too that a lot of people don't realize. These are children that parents work on farms that move from farm to farm and change schools, just like our Spanish-speaking population that we also serve. So.
You had mentioned that it's very difficult to get documentation. How are you able to get documentation?
One thing that's really, I say this in all the places I go and talk to the people, that it's really important that people understand in the state of Vermont is really unique for many reasons, but the biggest reason is our primary agricultural commodity in the state of Vermont is the dairy industry. And the dairy industry operates 12 months a year, 365 days, 25 hours, 24 hours. That feels like 25 hours a day. Basically what that means is it's not seasonal, it's temporary. And so yep. So it's not seasonal, it's temporary. And so it's exempt from the current existing federal agricultural visa laws. It is impossible to be a dairy farmer to legally hire someone from Mexico. If you're in Mexico, you're Joe Farmer, and I want to bring Juan to work on my farm in Vermont, there is no legal path to do so. So it's a really loaded question, because now to work in the dairy industry, to get papers to do so, it's impossible. But if you were to come pick apples, there is a visa program for that. So Vermont, we bring in about 450 Jamaican workers to pick our apples seasonally, and there's a visa process that folks have to go for and apply, and it's expensive. So.
Well, I guess what I was trying to ask, because you alluded to it's very hard to get documentation. There are a whole host of folks here. The dairy industry probably couldn't survive without the assistance of this population. No one else is willing to do the work. But does embassy from Mexico come here and help you get paper? How do you get a driver's license? When we watched the movie, we saw a real blurring between legal immigration and illegal immigration in Arizona. They were essentially saying, we don't want any more people here. We don't want people from the East Coast coming here. We don't want people from California coming here. We don't want people from Mexico coming here. But we have a huge population, and not often, but what the Obama administration is talking about is, how do we make people legal? How do we take a population that's here and provide them? The last time, I think, was 1988.
The golden question.
Right. Yeah, Clinton. It was the Clinton administration. It was the last act he did before he left office.
When for Irish citizens. So, notwithstanding that Obama can propose something and Congress can let it die, which they're currently doing. But are there ways to somehow provide some protections for the people who are making lives here?
Is there anything being done to kind of make a law for the dairy industry that works like the agriculture industry?
So, the Leahy administration has tried for years and years and years, he's looked at getting, that's another thing that's unique. Chime in anytime, but really unique about Vermont is, our U.S. senators and congressmen fully support our labor force in Vermont, and they've taken many steps. Our governors, everybody pretty much in our office is supporting this industry. The difficulty is it's that, as we saw, federal law versus state law. So yes, Leahy has tried to have a supplemental addendum to the H-2A seasonal agricultural visa program, as I was talking about how it's okay, you can come pick apples, you can pick anything, ground crops, anything seasonal, no problem. And so he has been looking at, and he's tried year after year after year to have an addendum in there that allows dairy to also be eligible for this program, and it has been shot down every single time. So, the current immigration reform bill is, there are these supplements to it, which actually does include the dairy industry, but, again, we're closing our annual legislative session, and it's clear immigration reform is not going to go through this year, so, hopefully next year. But as it stands now, there's they're really, it's just, we're gridlocked. I mean, we're gridlocked as a state to how to legally bring workers here to our state for the dairy industry.
Well, I'm just thinking, we saw this whole thing about Arizona, basically, well, I don't know if they quite say it, is taking the law into their own hands. They don't see it that way. But I'm just wondering, can Vermont then just decide, well, we're kind of the federal government. We're doing what we want to do. We want Mexicans here working on our farms, so we're going to do it. Can Vermont just say, we're going to do this? I mean, why does Vermont have to go along with the United States?
Well, Vermont does not have the discretion to adopt or change any policies about immigration, because no state is in charge of immigration. But what Vermont can do and has done is to signal to workers, both through policy and through other changes, that we are not going to be Arizona. So Vermont has extended to non-citizens the ability to get driver's licenses, which I think is probably the biggest thing a state can do, to allow people to have something to let them to travel, but also to show, to open a bank account, to get a library card, that kind of thing. The other thing that states can do, and that I don't think has arisen in Vermont, but I suspect Vermont would treat the right way, is to enforce health and safety, to help workers by enforcing health and safety protections for all workers, regardless of citizenship. You're beginning to see that in some states, especially like New York, where the state attorney general is saying minimum wage laws are minimum wage laws. Everybody gets the minimum wage, regardless of your citizenship. So no one should be afraid to report abusive work conditions and things like that. Those are the kinds of things I think the states have the most control of, and you see the contrast between the way Vermont has handled it and the way Arizona has handled it. Arizona has said, you get no help with anything.
And I think, actually, I'd like to say one thing, I know translate. I think it's important to clarify that it's actually also not just the state that has done these things, but it's actually people organizing. Yo quiero decir que él dijo que está el estado de Vermont haciendo esta cosa, pero yo quiero decir que no es el estado, que es ustedes, sí está su lucha. So just translating that it's not that the state just granted that out of nowhere, it's that actually, like, Migrant Justice organized and won that. And that's like what's also happening in Arizona and these other places, and laws that have passed in California, the trust that just passed, is people actually like taking the power into their own hands. So I think we can be allies and help people do, like, when folks that are actually like immigrants in this country can say what they are doing, we can support them. I think that is, rather than look to the state or the government to do it, it's like we can listen to people and support them in the struggles. Yo solo decía que no es solo que pueden hacer como los federales y todo, que esta personas como usted y personas como en California, todos nos encontramos en Arizona, sí, están luchando en sus propias cosas, y nosotros podemos ayudar a ustedes, ayudar a los movimientos, sí, y no solo preguntar al gobierno qué pueden hacer.
I just wanted to add one more thing to this, because the other thing, while the driver's privilege cards have passed, I think another really positive thing that Vermont could do that we have not yet done is bringing what we currently have as our state police policy for bias-free policing. The next move Vermont could make is bringing that through all of our counties and our local police agencies, because personally, while I support driver's privilege cards, I'm really fearful that it's going to get a lot more people caught up in our deportation system, simply because local police officers can still choose to stop people opposed to state, and they can ask questions that state police currently cannot. And I think that there's a lot of lack of education on that subject out there, and that frankly really makes me very concerned. So that's one thing I'd like to see happen. Another thing that Vermont could do, it's ironic, I've been doing this now for a while, and I would never have considered myself a regulator enforcement person, but I've seen enough infractions across the state when it comes to housing conditions, poor wages, just flat out breaking the law, that there really is I would venture to say almost no regulation of the dairy industry, and that is a big problem, and that's something we could do much better. And you know, as a matter of fact, I sat in a meeting a couple weeks ago with the U.S. Department of Labor. It was an invitational meeting, and it was the focus was on the H-2A visa program, and it was all about producers who have been fined for laws that have been in existence since the 70s, but have really only been enforced up until this year. And people were being fined, producers, huge apple growers, we're talking like big business in Vermont, fined for wage infractions. So basically, you know, you're an apple grower, you grow apples, you run out of your crops, so you start importing them from the guy down the street. Well, if you have visa workers, H-2A visa workers on your farm that have touched those apples that you just imported from down the street, you have to pay different, you're now subject to paying time and a half. Whereas if it's all on your farm, the hours are unlimited. Okay, so I'm listening to this meeting and these intricacies of this oversight and regulation, and I'm sitting there like, you know, no one's even enforcing the federal minimum wage laws on dairy farms. People get paid by the week. People work 60 hours. Nobody checks out the housing. It's like, and we're talking about who touched an apple. I'm thinking, this is really actually frightening. I actually walked away from that meeting. I had already had enough knowledge about the system that I was concerned, but I left that meeting going, wow, you know, wow. Little bit.
Between reality and the people who are supposed to be monitoring.
And just room for growth, you know, and the subject, the way it works in the state of Vermont is housing. So because there's no federal visa system for temporary agricultural labor, there is no loopholes that Mr. Employer dairy farmer needs to go through to have his housing inspected. There just is no housing inspection. And that actually falls on individual. I mean, so I'm assuming you folks in the audience are interested in getting involved in changing things. That's regulated by what's called the health officers. And these are basically, for most part, volunteer positions that are, you know, sort of at town by town responsible for making sure that these housing conditions are adequate. And that's ridiculous. I mean, because that's like asking your neighbor, you might be related to the farm. I mean, it's so connected, and it's not a paid position, it's not a trained position. There's only one case currently, to my knowledge, in the state of Vermont that this has been taken forward for finding substandard living conditions. So.
You speak of them as temporary, and it seems to me that the critical point is that they're year-round. Mm-hmm. And that's why visas haven't been created for them. It seems to me that the federal government will give a visa if you go home again, if you're seasonal. But year-round people, I mean, these people are here for 4 or 5 years or more. They're not really what I'd call temporary. Mm-hmm. One other issue that I wanted to mention is I certainly agree with supporting what Migrant Justice is doing. I started by being a driver for people who couldn't get to the grocery store, who couldn't get to the doctors, who couldn't get anywhere. And then to see how many people were willing to come to the State House. I drove repeatedly to get young people there who were taking time off from working. Maybe they worked all night, but they were still willing to come into that strange environment and meet with legislators over and over. Very, very impressive group of people.
Please. A ver, Justicia Migrante también está involucrada en este tema de encontrar un amendment para el
H2A.
¿Sabes? O el enfoque es más bien global y derechos generales. I asked Abel if Migrant Justice is involved in kind of this lobbying more specifically on having a dairy permit related to the agricultural permit, whether it's a 2-year permit or whatever the case may be.
Pues la verdad todavía no, pero como ahorita acaban de pasar lo de las licencias y estamos viendo qué es lo que viene, estamos preguntándoles a todos mis compañeros que son migrantes también, preguntándoles que cuáles serían las opciones, la mejor, buscando la mejor que podamos. Queremos también tener salud, el derecho a salud, y también queremos, no sé, sí, eso sería importante, también tener permiso para venir a trabajar.
So he's saying, at the moment, no, but now that Migrant Justice has won licenses, folks are discussing and figuring out what the future campaigns will be, and it's also important to have access to healthcare. But it would be great to have visas.
Entonces, ¿todos ustedes están incluidos en este nuevo healthcare system? Ustedes van a recibir.
Todavía no sabemos. So with the law, with the new agreement on the CARE Act, it's not determined. There was a study done to determine. Actually, Melissa can probably answer this question better than me. Whether or not undocumented workers will be covered under the Green Mountain CARE Act is.
Right, there was a study that was required to be presented to the Green Mountain Care Board last year, and it was a very objective, you know, we all submitted information for the report, and they haven't said publicly one way or the other, but I strongly believe and have heard them say that they will not exclude anybody from the single payer system.
Right.
But currently.
But it isn't single
Current, right, that would be in
Yeah.
2017.
Right.
So no, people cannot access health insurance, but they can access health care and do at many of the free clinics or at the federally qualified health centers.
I have a question about the racial profiling, which is, to me, a very big issue. And we met with our local police chief about that at the time I was driving young men to Berlin Mall to do their grocery shopping. And I said, what would happen if somebody backed into my car? Would I be charged with harboring people? Would they be questioned even if they weren't driving the car? What is the status? And he said, oh, don't want people to be afraid to go shopping. I said, well, they are afraid to go shopping. And then we had several more meetings with him, and apparently he felt strongly that his force should only be working on crimes, and he got that point across to them. And I think Middlebury wrote a very good policy of no racial profiling. And how far has that gone in the state? Has it gone to other cities by city, or is there, I thought there was going to be a state policy to that effect. Never happened?
We hoped that there would be too. I regret that we have had no luck at the legislature to force all municipal police departments to have a bias-free policing policy, which doesn't seem in the year 2013 to be a very difficult argument to have. But then again, we're having the same stonewalling on use of force and tasers and things like that. So our hope is that as legislators see that the state police implemented such a policy and that it was in their interest and that the world didn't stop turning, that the legislature will become more comfortable with the idea of forcing municipal police departments to do the right thing. However, there are, as we know from Migrant Justice's experience, there are some real outliers. I'm looking at Franklin County, where you have some real pockets of resistance to even something as basic as a policy which says we will not discriminate against people. I mean, all it does is restate the law, but they won't adopt it or train their officers, and that's a problem.
I think what I'd like to do is maybe take one more question. Was there one in the back?
Yeah, I guess immigration reform to me seems to be a pretty broad catch-all in terms of political debate. And I suspect over the next couple of years, everyone will be favoring some form of immigration reform, usually a policy issue. What does that mean? And I guess I'd like to hear from your perspective. What would be the key elements in really achieving some meaningful reform in the next 2 to 4 years?
Huge question. I mean, so for me, I absolutely want a path for people who choose to seek permanent residence or citizenship. I want that to be an option as part of it. I also want there to be, I mean, there's so many people that want to come to the United States, and it's on this lottery system, and it's sort of like what country you come from, you know, are you from Russia, are you from Mexico, are you from Guatemala, and everybody gets different numbers. And the numbers of individuals wanting to come from Latin America have always exceeded the lottery tickets, if you will. And so I'd like to see more tickets available. And I, you know, personally believe if you're, you know, you don't have a criminal record and you're here, you want to work, I want people to come here. So, and not everybody wants to stay here permanently. I mean, I work with many people that don't want to live in the United States forever. They want to come, they want to make money, and they want to go home. And I think that's perfectly fine too. So I believe in that. I also believe in, you know, the state of the border, it is insecure, and, you know, it's a human rights issue, but it's a security issue. I mean, we have major drug cartels and scary stuff going across our borders. And as much as I want all the great people to come into our country, I don't want the other people to come in the country. So I think that we do need to have some border security. And, you know, finally, I really think that we need to look at the bigger issue as to why are so many people coming here. And to me, that says that their basic needs aren't being met back home. And so, you know, if we're talking about Mexico, I think that I would love to see the United States create better educational systems and more job opportunities that doesn't force people basically to leave, to come seek other opportunities. Because I don't know how many people have traveled in rural Mexico lately, but it's really sad. You know, you see villages and communities of women and children and old men because everybody else has left, and that's really no way to live, and that's sad. So I think those three components are pretty mandatory in order to have something that's actually going to be viable and that works and sustainable.
And from the ACLU's perspective, the long-term goal would be very similar. We are opposed to a quota system based on national origin, but in the short term, I think there's some really low-hanging fruit that the United States can grab. The first of which is to recognize that there has to be a path for people who are here and who are productive members of society. And I think we kind of had a watershed moment during the last election when many of the major party primary candidates acknowledged that it's okay to say out loud that if you're here and you're working and you have a family and you've put down roots, that you're probably not going to be an enemy of the United States. And so that for us was a big, you know, we need to keep going down that path. The other thing short term that we would like to see is to remove some of the senselessness and brutality of the removal system, principally relating to, number one, about 20% of the removals now involve people who have a child who's a United States citizen, right? And so you're saying, you know, like in the movie, you know, Jorge, there's a real chance that he could have been sent back, leaving a son and a spouse in the United States, which is crazy. And the other thing is that, shockingly enough, the United States every year deports, quote unquote, United States citizens, mistakenly. You can't deport a United States citizen, but they do it anyway. And my colleagues down south have represented a man who was deported. He didn't speak a word of Spanish. He'd never been to Mexico, but he had olive skin, and he had a mental illness, and ICE decided that he was not a citizen. And he was forcibly put on a plane and made to march across the Mexican border, and he spent 152 days on the streets in Mexico before he went to the consulate and he was recognized as an American. I mean, the system is so broken if that's going on. So for us, those are the short term. It's the breaking up families, and it's the huge rate of error that I think really have to be fixed immediately, apart from whatever decision we're going to make about the future.
Bueno, yo lo que quiero es que haya menos deportaciones.
What I want to see is fewer deportations.
Y bueno, no entiendo, hay muchas. Yo entiendo que hay mucha acción en Phoenix, Arizona, porque ahí es el lugar donde es tan haciendo más deportaciones. Entonces, pues nosotros estamos apoyando mucho también. Vamos a hacer varias acciones en varios estados, si es posible. De hecho, en el 14 de diciembre de este mes vamos a tener una reunión en Boston. Vamos a planear una acción para enero, para ver si podemos también hacer una acción contra las deportaciones.
And so he's talking about how he wants to stop the deportations, and there's actions in Arizona, a strong campaign where the deportations are the strongest, and there's been actions throughout the country, and there will be, in the 14th or 15th of this month, there will be a reunion, or a meeting in Boston for people to plan an action in January to stop deportations and stop ICE.
I want to thank you very much for being here and sharing your information and your stories with us. Thank you so much, Abel.